So 16-year hiatus of Tadpole, 27 years since the band first formed, 12 years together as a successful band. And you've got this new unheard of album plus a collection of all of your 3 released albums as the Tadpole Collection that's just come out. So is Remains of the Day, this is the totally new one, unheard of by fans. And is it a B-side collection, weird songs, demos, live recordings, or all of the above?
What it is it's a combination of songs that were demoed for various albums and some that were chosen as B-sides. So basically, I mean, part of the Tadpole recording process was that there was always a large bunch of songs that were written. And there was always a bunch of songs that went through a bit of a vetting process, not just with the band directly, but, you know, we always sought opinions from record label at the time, number of trusted sources, right? And so we would go from something which would be probably like 20 plus songs, and whittle them down to about 12, 13 that would eventually make an album. So in hindsight, what it was is there are a lot of songs that we played live. There are a lot of songs that we recorded. I mean, sure, they're not up to the same high production quality that the albums were, but it's interesting listening to them in hindsight because they're obviously a lot rawer and they just capture a part of the band which I think a lot of people would have heard at the live shows rather than what you eventually heard on the album, which tended to be a much more highly produced version of the band. I mean, all the songs started off as a typical rock band. It was like drums, bass, guitars in the jam room, Renee adding her vocals on top. But yeah, that's really what you can expect. Obviously, like, it's been a long time since the band has done anything. But yeah, we were basically going through the vault, our archives. And there was a large number of songs which we had recordings for, and they were like reasonably good quality recordings. And we thought, this kind of rounds out the concept of what the Tadpole Collection is. What you've got are the 3 studio albums that span, I guess, almost like 3 particular eras of the band. And Remains of the Day, which is like the Rarities and Unreleased album, are all the songs that were written in between all these different points in time. So they span quite a large section of the band's career. It's not just, the songs that were pre-Buddhafinger or pre-Medusa album or whatever. Like, they actually, those hidden gems from throughout the whole band's career.
Are there any songs on there that you wish you could have continued with to see where they would have ended up?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing because what you're going to hear on Remains of the Day is, as I said before, they're much rawer versions of the songs. But we recorded all of the songs before we went into the studio and did like the final, finished studio version of it. And just listening back, there's a few which. Actually, it would have been good to record that, like let it, come to a fully produced fruition version of it. For whatever reason, it didn't. It could have remained hidden and unheard for forever. But a couple of us basically came together for this project and were unanimous in the idea of showing another side of the band which hadn't been released with the prior album. So that's really what was one of the driving factors behind it, to show another side of the band, which those that had come to the shows had heard some of these songs before, but there wasn't an available or released version of the songs. So yeah, this is like a gift to those that still remember the band fondly. Hopefully they'll get see another aspect of the band or hear another aspect, and helps to round out, the career of the band.
That's what I always love about B-side albums, is that you get another angle on the band. Like, you never think that this band would be interested in country or something else, and then you hear these other influences, or sometimes it's a strange cover that they do. So what might a listener to Remains of the Day, what's something that they might uncover that you might think would be a surprise for them?
There's a couple of acoustic tracks on there.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that'll be a pleasant surprise for listeners. I mean, when the band was touring, we did do the odd acoustic show. I played the odd acoustic show here and there, but it was never really a front and center feature of the band. It was more, okay, look, there's an opportunity to kind of play some songs, but in a toned down setting. So we did the odd acoustic show here and there. And even on the studio albums, there are elements where maybe some acoustic guitar was recorded, but there was never anything that was really kind of recorded in a studio sense that was stripped back to just an acoustic guitar and a vocal. Like, remove the electric guitar. I'm an electric guitarist. I like my guitars loud and heavy, right? So acoustic guitar, it was kind of one of those things which I had an acoustic guitar. It was good to be versatile, but I always lean more towards, making loud riffs and playing loud guitar. So I think that's something which will be a nice surprise. Just hearing a couple of songs that are really stripped down, stripped back, just an acoustic guitar and vocals. I think my fondest Big Day Out memory was earlier than that. It was I think it might have been the 2001, where we played main stage for the first time, and the main headliners were, if I remember correctly, Limp Bizkit and Rammstein. Like, it was that line.
Oh yeah.
There.
I went to that one as well. Yeah, that was a good one.
That was my fondest memory. That was just. Look, forgive me. Like, it's so long ago. Like, it all starts to kind of blur together after a while. But that one just that sticks in my mind in particular because it was the first time we played main stage. We did a Big Day Out performance before that, but it was on one of the side stages at the time. So in my memory, that's the one that I remember most, because when you walk out onto the main stage and it's a stadium that's got, I don't know, up to like 40,000 people, it's a bit of a surreal experience. So that's why that always that sticks in my head. Look, you know what, let's not beat around the bush. I was influenced by new metal. Like, my background... Okay, my background is... I'm from West Auckland. I was weaned on Metallica. I went through a Pantera phase. I got into Fear Factory. Like, I went quite... I loved all different types of metal. So I was like, you're that type of metal. When new metal came about, I was all about that as well. Mainly because it was like... It had this interesting... melodic aspect to it as well. But look, I'm not going to lie. I was influenced by all sorts of different types of metal, including new metal. Now, I know to some people that's not going to be cool, and I was like, well, I don't care, Seeing Limp Bizkit live was one of the best concert memories I've ever had, and I will own that. I will admit that. It was that time. Like, it was that era where modern rock was kind of weaving in other elements as well. It wasn't, I don't know, it was just so diverse. But anyway, like the point of that is that, look, there was a new metal edge to it, and that was me. I mean, even the type of music gear that I was using was influenced by that. It was more, not to kind of geek out on guitar stuff, but more of your rock guitar gear lineup is like a Marshall and a Les Paul. Right? Mm-hmm. The modern rock new metal thing was more of a PRS into a Mesa Boogie. And so that was my sound. Yeah. I was a PRS into a Mesa Boogie kind of guy. It was a fat sound. And just for clarity, like, we never ever had the record label tell us what we should sound like. I mean, the thing when you're dealing with rock bands is, and especially in a band like Tadpole at the time, you had a lot of strong personalities. We weren't like pop musicians, which are like, oh, we'll do whatever it takes to just, be heard and to blow up and be whatever. You were dealing with like 4 individuals that all had very strong opinions around what the music should sound like. And we all had very different influences. Like I shared before, I mean, mine was definitely more from a rock metal background. Renee actually had a greater background in like jazz. Like,
Oh, right.
Yeah, so you may not pick that up listening to it, but just the way that she would craft her melodies and her note choices was more, from other influences and not just a rock sense. The drummer, Dino, well, he listened to everything from like AC/DC to Iron Maiden through to various, almost funk, quite rhythmic inspired things as well. So it was just this big melting pot. So I just want to kind of clarify that, because we had no one say you should sound this way, because it's hard enough when we've all got our own opinions on what we like in music. The hardest thing was actually us as a band making the music together, because we all came from quite different musical backgrounds. The only bit of polish, I guess, or finessing that happened was actually in the recording process with the albums, where we had basically another person come in and help shape and give a perspective to the albums, and that was the producer. And sometimes there was additional things that were added, and we were like, okay, let's roll with it. There are other times it's like, we are not going to do that. So
right.
When you're in the studio, you're trying a bunch of things to try and bring the song to life as best as you can. You'll record a demo version before you go in and record the final song.
Yeah.
And you kind of use that to kind of go, all right, are there elements that are missing? Are there certain things? Are there certain dynamics that we need to bring up? Look, from a guitarist perspective, the one thing I guess I was guilty of is when you listen to the demos, it was literally just one guitar, because that was the reality. But then I go into the studio and I've got this opportunity to just lay down a lot of overdubs and a lot of layers and create a lot of additional textures, which was always an interesting challenge when it came to playing some of the recorded songs live, because I'd layered down so many guitar parts, but now I had to figure out what was the best way to take just the main bits, which could be from 3 different guitar parts, and play that on one guitar live. When you're in the studio, you're not trying to capture a live performance, right? You're trying to get the best possible representation of a song down in a studio environment. So it's all about the song. It's all about creating the dynamics, the textures, making it sound full, or making it a journey for the listener to kind of go through it. And so that was my focus in the studio. And then you go live, and live, it was about the energy of the performance. It's about the interaction with the crowd. It's not about having a million layers anymore. And that's why, when it came to playing recorded songs live, what we kind of found acceptable was, okay, if there's certain things that are part of the music that are not part of the organic for musicians, like there's a backing track with a loop or something like in All Right, then okay, that was acceptable to kind of have on a backing track. But I'm not really sure about bands like rock bands these days that have additional guitars on a backing track or additional backing vocals, on a backing track. For me, I think, the live performance is all about the rawness and the energy that you want to get across in it. It's not meant to be perfect. It's not meant to be an absolute carbon copy of the recorded version. You're meant to kind of, let it be a warts and all kind of experience between you and the audience. I mean, look, for me, the beauty of rock is that there's always been some kind of evolution to it. And I mean, I grew up in the 80s, and so I was actually a big kind of like 80s glam rock fan, right? And so then we go into the 90s, and that whole power ballad, party fun time, Motley Crue-esque kind of music, just completely got wiped away by this new attitude of rock that was coming through that was just darker and kind of more real. So I'm just saying that because music always evolves, it swings and shifts. There's only so much, I guess, a certain style of music can be around for before it gets overdone, and then I would assume people are craving something new to listen to. So it makes complete sense that you would go from a highly, highly kind of multi-layered approach going through to something that is a bit more like they were, jamming in your garage. The whole garage rock thing, that's just as raw and as real as it can be. Tadpole has had several band member changes over the years. I wasn't part of the founding lineup, but yes, you're correct. At the time, the band did, as far as I'm aware, do a show in those early days, the early part of Big Day Out. Yeah, well, like I was saying before, I mean, we all had different influences. It wasn't like we all listened to the same music, had the same influences, and were then just channeling the same music that we were weaned on into these songs. We all had very, very different musical influences. Now, to that point on the disco beat, I'll tell you how that came about. So we've got a song called All Right, which was from the Buddhafinger, and that's the one that has the disco beat in it. Now, that wasn't... That came out of a jam where Dino was just taking the piss. Like, he was literally just being cheeky, taking the piss. We were jamming the riff at the time, and he just started playing like the disco beat. It wasn't an intentional thing. He was just trying to be a funny guy. It worked. Because there's not too many Tadpole songs that actually have a disco beat. It's just that one song. Like I said, it came from him originally taking the piss, but as we were jamming it, it had this energy to it. There are times when you're jamming in the practice room, and sometimes your jams they amount to nothing, right? Like, you're just trying to get something working and it just doesn't feel right. Then there are these very kind of rare moments where a jam, there's just this thing that you're doing, it just feels right. It just had an energy to it. And so at this point, you're not really thinking about, oh no, this is a disco beat, this is going to sound like whatever. It was just, it just felt right. And then Renee started singing over the top. And in that moment, we just felt like, okay, there's something very interesting and cool going on here. We don't know why, we don't know what. It was just one of those spontaneous things that happened. But it stuck and it worked. And as we played the song more, we started to kind of get more of a sense of the direction it was going. And then we're in the studio and we started adding a bit more, electronic elements to it. And it ended up being the song that most people know now. But its origins was just a random practice room jam, which all of a sudden just felt good, and it had this vibe, and we were like literally we were jumping around the practice room as we were like jamming this thing. Obviously, like at the time, my main focus was just writing guitar riffs and jamming with the other guys, and it was very much how we create instrumentals. Like, so in a lot of cases, it was, we had this kind of instrumental music idea that came first, and I guess what Renee would try and do is she would try and find a vocal that would weave and make sense to her over the bed of this music that we'd kind of come up with. Yeah, I mean, look, how she did that, I don't know. I mean, she was always carrying a notebook around of lyrics and ideas, and no doubt she had a whole bunch of melodies that perhaps she already had stored away in her head. She was just trying to find the right time to marry perhaps a melody she had to the music that we were writing. That could have been one thing. I mean, I don't really know. I can't really speak for how her creative process and how she came up with the vocals. All I know is that initially it started off with like us jamming. There'd be some kind of like instrumental idea, and that would kind of form a basis with which she could then bounce her vocal ideas off. I tell you, the one thing that I think was so unique about what Renee did, aside from just her note choices, obviously, is she had the most amazing, or she developed the most amazing harmony vocals or background vocals. Now, these weren't kind of like your traditional typical, it's like a third or a fifth and they just like perfectly harmonize like that. You listen to songs, and I like to kind of describe it as like, it's kind of like these Aquarius vocal lines. They're just something else entirely. Listening to a song like Backdoor, you can hear what I mean. It's like she's got this backing vocal, which is like a counter melody rather than just this thing that harmonizes with what her main melody is doing. I think that was the thing that was most unique to her, aside from like what she did in the main vocals, is that the these Aquarius backing vocals, these textures were just so unique and different, and I haven't heard anything similar since. So I just got to give props to her that I don't know where that came from for her, what she was inspired by, but yeah, just you'll know what I mean when you listen to some of the tracks. Oh, I think it's probably easiest to kind of start with me. You know what? Only because this was the music that I grew up on.
You're going to say West Borland?
No, I'm not going to say Wes Borland, but I do think he was such an incredibly talented and unique riff writer. Like, you know, just, yeah. But no, not Wes Borland. Now, I would actually, because these are my influences, this is who I grew up, I would like to see either Dimebag Darrell or James Hetfield replace me. I think that would be super interesting.
I had written down Dino from Fear Factory.
Dino would be interesting as well. I think his style, his guitar style, is very machine gun, super syncopated, and I don't think any Tadpole songs were like that precise and that machine-like. So, I mean, it would be interesting. I would be very interested to see that, but yeah, I mean, just
you're right. You guys are a bit more fluid.
Yeah.
His sound is a bit abrasive, to be honest.
Yeah.
What about drums?
Drums. Oh, I'm kind of on the spot here. Who would I like to see? All right, the drummer from Def Leppard.
Oh, really? With only one hand. Yeah.
Once again, I'm kind of defaulting to like bands that I've like listened to a lot of their music. I mean,
article I read about that losing the arm in that accident actually invented pop metal.
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, look. First of all, I mean, I think what he went through, the trauma of that experience could have deflated anyone. And I mean, from what I understand, the fact that his band stood by him rather than going, "You've only got one arm now. Like, how can you even continue playing?" And this was at a point where Def Leppard had blown up. From what I read, Pyromania hit the US charts and was just behind Michael Jackson's Thriller at one point, if I understand things. It was massive. So they were already a massive band, and then for their drummer to go through that accident and basically stand by him through thick and thin, it's incredible that he went through I would imagine, one of the hardest times in his life, and he found a way to navigate through that. And he had the confidence of his band members. And yeah, look, I think by necessity he had to adapt what he was doing. And I think that reflected between Pyromania through to Hysteria. Like, obviously he had to kind of do things a bit more simpler than what he could do before. But he adapted a drumming style and he was able to make it work, and it's still become such an embedded part of their sound. So I guess, I mean, look, there's so many jokes that fly around about, the one-armed drummer, right? And we all know who that is. But the reality is that guy deserves so much kudos and respect for being able to pick himself up and continue his dream of being a musician, a touring musician, that then goes on to have like this epic album after one of the worst things he could have gone through. It's inspiring. So
yeah. It's an incredible story that they continued on, and also a technological achievement to like make a drum kit where he could trigger a second snare with his feet. That's pretty cool. Yeah. I had Abe Cunningham down from Deftones.
You know what? Yes, I would agree with that. Look, I was a massive Deftones. Okay, look, Deftones are still going. They've got so many albums now, but I was definitely influenced on the probably Around the Fur would be that White is Pony. my go-to Deftones album. I love those early albums. I love White Pony. I love Adrenaline, but Around the Fur is that, and Abe's drumming on that is just It's groovy, it's hooky. I mean, when you hear the intro drum beat around the foot, you know exactly what song it is.
Oh yeah, he's incredible. Yeah.
So he's just got a style and a flair to him. So I would like to see that. I think that would be very interesting.
All right. Who are we going to have on bass? On the replacement Tadpole? I felt like you guys had quite a high bass presence. Like, you could actually hear the bass notes. It wasn't just hooking in with you all the time. It's a couple of little playful notes.
Yes. So look, I'll talk about Tadpole bass, and then we can talk about who might be, a suitable kind of celebrity replacement. So when I first joined the band, the bassist that was with Tadpole was a guy named Kevin. Now, Kevin and I were more aligned in our taste in music. So when we were jamming in the practice room, we kind of got each other because we were from similar. We liked similar things. Then what happened was he left the band, and Paul joined the band. And Paul is who recorded the bass on the Buddhafinger. Paul added a very, very interesting element to the bass playing, because whereas Kevin was more, okay, you're four on the floor, rock bassist, kind of bassist, he generally follows the root notes with the riff and all that, like more, just more rock. Paul came from more of a funk rock background, so he was more of a bass player, if you know what I mean. He'd be more like inspired by Flea than he would be from, say, I don't know, Billy Gould from Faith No More, for example, right? So he brought a dynamic, in hindsight now, I mean, you can certainly hear this. He brought a dynamic where he just didn't play bass notes that followed a guitar riff. He found a way to kind of lock into what the drums were doing, but also make it work with what the guitars were doing, but then at the same time create melodies where needed on the bass, or do more of a walking bass thing rather than just sticking to root notes. So he was a lot more, I guess he was just, because of his background, he would have different note choices. And so I think that's then what you hear. You've got that influence within like a rock band framework, and you're hearing bass lines that are interesting. They're maybe a bit unpredictable, a bit unexpected. I mean, look, I would say probably the most, one of Paul's coolest bass lines that just, it's almost, you could just have that as a song in its own right. But with the song Nothing New that was on the Medusa, it's the first song on that album, he's just got this intricate moving bass line. He's not just, following a couple of notes. It's moving all over the place. And then I'm somehow doing this delayed picking guitar thing that's moving over it as well. So you've got these two different moving, almost like melodies and counter melodies, but somehow it works. So anyway, I say that because that was a dynamic that was added to the bass playing when Paul joined the band, and that's what was captured on the first album and on Nothing New. After we recorded Nothing New, he actually left the band. He went back to focusing on some other projects that he started prior to Tadpole, and so we got another bass player, Shannon, after that. I guess I'm just wrapping this up by saying, on the Buddhafinger, that's probably what you're hearing in the interestingness of the bass lines.
So more of a jazz influence, and not straight into root notes of what the guitar's doing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, look, in that respect, I guess who would be interesting to play bass? Actually, I said his name before, but I think, Billy from Faith No More. Simply because he's such a diverse bass player. Like, you listen to the Faith No More albums, and when he needs to play with a pick, he plays with a pick. When he needs to play with his fingers, he plays with his fingers. He does what is best for the song, and he's so versatile. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And finally, this might be the hardest one to answer, but who would you find, living or dead, to replace Renee in a new version of Tadpole?
While it's in the context of like this energetic rock framework, she didn't. I don't think she had a stereotypical rock voice, and that comes from like her influences. That's why it was always such a unique combination, I think. Oh, look, I think that's every singer in a rock band's issue, right? Like, being able to hear themselves over just this loud band. Like, the guitarist is always turning his amp up to 11. The drummer's always smacking the crap out of his drums,
Yeah.
and all the singer wants is, like, the monitors to be loud enough so she can hear herself. Okay, look, I can't actually think of a female vocalist that I can straight away say would be able to pick up, Renee's spot. I think probably the most interesting thing, and only because I never ever got to see this person perform live, but in my opinion, they're probably one of the greatest rock vocalists that have ever existed, and that would be Freddie Mercury. Just for giggles.
Oh, right.
I would like to see Freddie Mercury, do the singing. His range is immense, right? So, he can sing the female range as well as like the guy's range. So how about that, Freddie Mercury?
Yeah. I had down this sound a little odd. I had down Diana Ross.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I just thought they had a similar sort of timbre to their voices. Obviously, totally different genres, but I just thought it'd be interesting to, go with Abe on drums and Dino on guitar and Diana on vocals. But that might have been how I was hearing Tadpole as well.
Well, hey, look, I mean, once again, you got a collection of musicians that come from such diverse backgrounds, right? And I guess that would be the commonality with, what Tadpole had, is you have these musicians that have different influences, they come together, somehow they make it work. That would be an interesting lineup.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I'm from West Auckland, the Blind Spot guys are West Auckland. We're actually, basically we're from the same area. So, yeah, they were like the little brothers that were up and coming, right? So they kind of... It was almost like, okay, Tadpole's first album did its thing, and then there was the New Kids on the Block, not literally, but, Blind Spot, and they came out with their first album, and that made waves with Kiwi listeners as well. So, but I'm just trying to think, I can't recall whether we actually did do any shows at one point, but...
There's another band, 8 Foot Sativa, they were active at the same time as you guys. Did you ever play with them?
Yeah, 8 Foot Sativa. They were definitely holding down, the metal fort really, really well. Once again, it's one of those things that the music industry is a very, very small circle, really. And I don't know whether music listeners actually realize that, for example, I could know the guys in Blind Spot, I could know the guys in 8 Foot Sativa. It's just... we're all connected in a way, and while what we do creatively just appeals to certain types of listeners, the fact is we're all always quite supportive of each other, whether it was publicly said or not, because it's like, for any of these bands to go out and do what they do, they're obviously making a mark, they're resonating with the fans. It's no easy thing to do. And you can kind of share that experience, like while your music base may be different, is that, well, ultimately, you can't help but give kudos to 8 Foot Sativa for what they did. I mean, I think that they made their mark when it comes to New Zealand metal. I'm not sure if there's anyone that's really ever kind of taken over the metal flag to the same extent as what they laid in the ground then. But yeah.
She kind of always had a kind of pop sensibilities.
She had. Yeah, look, I mean, what can you say about She Had? I mean, look, they are an institution when it comes to New Zealand rock music, right? They've been around for so long, and they're still out there making new music. And the thing that I find really interesting when you get to hear an artist's repertoire over time Whether it's Tadpole and you listen to the 3 or now the 4 CD albums, or you listen to She Had and all the countless albums that they've done. But I find albums really interesting now. And maybe this is just me, I'm showing my age, right? But to me, an album is a time capsule. It's a snapshot in time of so many different things. It was like the mindset and the experiences of what the artist was going through at that time. It's the thoughts and feelings of what the lyric writer was pondering at that point. You know, in addition to what was the musical landscape like, what was the social landscape like. It literally is a snapshot in time. And if you pay attention, you can actually see how an artist grows and changes over time with each different album that they release. That's why I always find it interesting. I mean, we're all going to have our favorite albums, right? Like there's an album from an artist which is like the album that you'll go to, and you get some people like, well, why do they? I just want more of this kind of like this type that they were doing, right? But the reality is that we as people are always constantly growing, evolving, and changing. You know, I would be lying if I was to say that I'm the same person now I was as the 20-something-year-old that was playing in Tadpole way back in the day. Like, I've had, 2 decades of life experiences since then. And so I'd like to think that I my growth on this planet has evolved and changed. I'm just saying that with artists like She Had, for example, as well, you listen to their albums and you will pick up on their journey as people as well as artists. And especially with John Toogood, you'll get a snapshot into what was top of mind for him when he was writing for each album. What were the things that were most important or most interesting for him that he felt he could put into a song. It's the same with Tadpole, with Renee, over the 3 different albums. I mean, it's over a shorter period of time, but once again, if you listen to it, you can pick up the journey. And I think that's super interesting. Yeah, look, it was... I know for me personally, it was a super exciting time. I mean, so the context for me is I joined the band after they had started to kind of become known with Blind. Okay, so Blind was already out. It was starting to get a little bit of traction. I joined the band shortly after that. So from the second Tadpole single onwards through to like the first 2 albums, that was my contribution to the band. So recording the Buddhafinger was an incredibly interesting and exciting time. Multiple reasons. One, we got to record with the same producer that did She Had, that did Supergroove, like Malcolm Welsford. Like, here was us getting to record our first album with this iconic engineer, producer, had recorded these amazing New Zealand albums. So that was one of the things that was super interesting. And now we're going into a studio and working directly with Malcolm. The second thing was, and now in hindsight, it was just such a privilege to be able to do so, was we recorded most of that album at York Street Studios, which doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
Now, York Street Studios was like the studio that if you could record at, you would do it at York Street Studios. Dino raves about the drum sound. I mean, look, I realize, getting a good ambience and room sound for the drums is important, but it seems to be that studio, like, drummers just loved it, and Dino was no different. It was just like recording your drum sound. It was just big. It was huge. So there's that. So there's working with Malcolm, recording in an iconic studio like York Street, and getting into a professional recording environment. Up until this point, like, you got to remember that we didn't have digital audio workstations to start recording things on our computers, right? That wasn't around. It was more, okay, who do we know that has some kind of studio room that we're able to record, but we're not paying like full studio rates just yet? So there were a number of demos that we recorded at SAE, so the School of Audio Engineering.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we would be like the test case for a few people that are wanting to refine their chops. In return, for them practicing their recording skills, we would get some demos recorded out of it. So
that's just down the street from York Street.
Yeah, it was the same part of Auckland. So going from an SAE demo kind of environment through to, okay, this is the real deal now, and experiencing the recording process for the first time, where you start getting really pedantic about your tones, like your amps, like how it should be mic'd, the amount of effort it went into tuning the drums and then recording them and getting the mics all set up in the right place, the number of times that, you know, Renee would do vocals and redo vocals, and like the specificness and the attention to detail that then had to go into the recording process. The very first time you do that, it was exciting, it was interesting, it was scary, it was all of these things all wrapped up into one. And then to hear it for the first, you get all the tracks in place, right? And Malcolm puts together a rough mix. It's not like the final mix, just a rough mix. And you're in the control room. And he turns it up, turns the volume up on the speakers that are there, and you're listening to what you've just recorded. And it was like, wow. All of a sudden, that idea that you had in the practice room sounds so much bigger and more immense because of the recording process, because of the attention to detail to get all the little things right. It's not just a live take anymore, but this is a full-blown wow. And I remember the first time I heard, I think it was our track For Me, like played loud in York Street. I was like, wow. Actually, sorry, I've got to correct myself on something. A good chunk of the drum tracks. Okay, so the drum tracks were recorded at York Street. This is what happens. Like, it's so long ago now.
Yeah.
The first couple of singles were recorded at York Street, and then the rest of the album, what we actually did was we hired, or Malcolm hired a batch out at Carry Beach, right? And so we had the drums already done. The rest of the tracking for the rest of the album. So we had the first couple of singles out, but the rest of the album was recorded at this batch at Carry York Street. Basically, Malcolm wheeled in all of his computer gear, all of his recording gear, and that was us. We were hanging out at Carry and each taking our turns to record
Nice.
The Buddhafinger.
That sounds like a really nice memory of doing that first one.
Yeah.
So that was the Buddhafinger?
Yeah, so that was the Buddhafinger album. Malcolm hired another place where he set up the studio. It wasn't out at Carry this time. It was more central Auckland. And so most of that was recorded there. I hope I got that right. Yeah.
And that was done 2 years later?
Correct.
So,
yeah,
just very, very, very straight right after touring, I suppose.
Yeah, and it was a super interesting... Well, I mean, it's an interesting time because what happens is your first album, you've got a stash of songs from like however long that you've accumulated that you can use to select for the first album. For the second album, we were writing a lot, but I guess it was like you didn't have the luxury like you did of the first album. So you're writing a bunch of songs. They may not be as road testers, because what we used to do was play a lot of songs on live shows to see how they would go down, see what the crowd response was like. And while we did do that with second album songs, they just weren't as... Well, we didn't get to stress test them as much. It's just because you got a shorter time frame before you're going in to record the album. So,
yeah. Well, that's the sophomore slump, isn't it? That these bands have like years of working on the road and working out what works best, and then maybe 10% of those crazy songs end up on an album. And then it's like, right, okay, what else have you got? It's like, not much. In fact, nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, well, like you better come up with a album that's better than that one. So was that quite challenging for you guys to suddenly have to have an album that was more impressive or bigger sounding or hookier?
Yeah, I mean, you never go into recording an album thinking, oh, it's got to do this. Like, it's really hard to kind of... We had no idea that the first Tadpole album would be as well received as it did. But when you go into the recording process, you don't even think about that stage. You're just focused on, all right, we've got a bunch of new songs. We want to capture them as best we can so that now we've got an album that's going to reflect that. Probably, I mean, there was a lot of writing going on, and I think even for that second album, we got up to around about 20 odd plus songs for that as well. But also, I think the hardest thing about being an artist is that you don't intentionally go out to write a song with an expectation that if you do certain things, it will be received a certain way, right? Even to this day, probably the Tadpole song that still gets played the most is All Right. And while I can tell you, and I shared before, that when we were first writing it and jamming it, there was like an energy to it and it was fun and we were bouncing around the practice room. Would I know that that's probably the Tadpole song that's still getting played on New Zealand rock radio now? I would have had no idea. And often, like, what we think are the song is not necessarily how it ultimately gets received. Sometimes, I mean, look, I'll just use an example. It's like Def Leppard, right? Like, Pour Some Sugar on Me was almost like a throwaway idea, and it became their biggest song. And so the artist isn't necessarily the most objective person when it comes to their own music, especially when you're so caught up in the creative process. Now, I guess, look, my thought process was, all right, we've got a bunch of these new ideas. We know we want it to sound as good in recorded format, if not better, than the Buddhafinger. As far as, like, the songs go, I tell you what, I think the Medusa is a darker album. Like, as compared to the Buddhafinger. If I was to, like, you know, analyze the albums now, the Buddhafinger is, I guess, it's that first album. There's like an energy to it. There's like a naivety to it. There's like, you know, it's the band that's doing something for the first time. It's fun sounding, yeah. The Medusa, I think, was after we'd gone through touring. There were internal challenges surfacing in the band. It was a bit more. It was more like, okay, now we got to get down to business and we've got to get the second album done, right? There were less new experiences. Like, it wasn't like you were recording in a studio for the first time. It wasn't like you were filming a music video for the first time. Like, it wasn't like we were going on tour for the first time. We'd experienced that now. So, you know, now it was like, okay, now we know the process. We've got to go through it again to create a second album. But I think, as part of that, like I said, there were tensions that were starting to brew inside the band. And I think what that did is it transferred into a much darker sounding album. Both, I guess, lyrically from Renee's perspective, but also just the sound of the album. It's not as... Even though there are up-tempo songs, just overall, I would say it's a darker, more melancholy album. You know, maybe it wasn't quite the flavour compared to the Buddhafinger, but... This is what I mean when we're talking about albums that are a snapshot in time of where the artist is at, plus everything that they're going through. So when I listen to it, that's what I hear. I hear the journey of a band that has gone through the excitement of a first album. Now, you know, there's additional, not pressures externally, but it's just more needing to focus and get the next album done. There's just different dynamics at play compared to the first album, and I think that's how it kind of revealed itself on that second album. So Shannon came on board because we'd actually done tours with his band previously. So he was in a band called Mama Said at the time. Great band. And when Paul announced that he wanted to leave the band to focus on other things, it was more a case of, okay, well, we can't slow down. We've got to keep going. We've got to get these songs recorded. We've got to like keep driving the band. If there was one thing, I'll tell you what, like Dean and Renee were so good at just constantly driving. Probably the thing that a lot of bands tend to suffer from is that it's very easy that when things get hard or whatever reason, like they slow down, like they take the foot off the gas pedal and it's like they pause. But Tadpole, despite things, just kept going, kept pushing through. I mean, that could have probably added to an element of burnout as well, but there was a strong work ethic in Tadpole at the time, and so there wasn't the luxury of, we can now just take 3, 6, whatever months time off to take our time to get a new member on board. We needed to get someone that could come on board quickly and help the band out, and really that's kind of how it came about. It was more, we knew Shannon, he was a great player, and it was like, okay, hey, can you help us out? We need to finish this album. We need to play some shows. So that's how he got introduced, and then once again, like, he added his kind of bass playing style on that second album as well. So at this point, I'd left the band. So yeah, so I was a part of the band during the first 2 albums, and after we'd done the album tour for the Medusa, as I was alluding to before, like there were tensions that were kind of just starting to grow within the band, and for me personally, it was like, okay, this is my time to kind of bow out from this, because I wasn't enjoying being in the band anymore. So that was part of my reason. So yeah, probably one of the hardest things that I had to do, because when you've spent 4 years having these amazing experiences in the band, but then also there were like these band tensions that you didn't talk about or weren't public about. When you leave that, it's a hard decision to make, but it was more, okay, for me, it was the right time. So that was when I left the band, and actually Shannon left at the same time. So there was a new guitarist and bassist that joined. Now, ironically, like I knew these guys as well. So there was like, hey, look, go for gold. This is now just the next chapter in Tadpole. And so what I was saying before, that there has been a number of lineup changes over the years. You will hear that if you listen closely when you listen to Remains of the Day, because it is actually a very diverse collection of songs that are from different time periods, that are from different band members. Yeah. So I'll be up front and say, look, it's not all me that contributed to this. It's a collection of a number of different people that helped write these songs in between the cracks at different points. So I'm kind of here as a spokesperson for the band, but I certainly wasn't involved across everything, right? When I've talked to Renee and Dino, like, the sense was that actually this third album didn't get as much awareness as perhaps it should. Once again, it's an interesting journey. It's a different album again compared to what the first 2 albums were like. It's rawer. There was a different producer that was involved in the process. There were different dynamics going on in the band. So while there were some things that were the same, there were some things that changed. So it's a different sounding album, but it's still got Renee's vocals on it. It's still got her thoughts and her lyrics and all that on it. And I think that's probably the unifying thing. Like, without Renee's voice, it's not really Tadpole. But, you can have different rock styles. Now, for me, because I'm a rock guitarist guy, I can hear the different styles, but someone else may not be as obvious, but I can hear that. So yeah, that's right. So yeah, so that was one of the key considerations for putting this collection together, is that there is likely some listeners out there that are aware of the first album. They may not be as aware of the second album, or they're not aware of the third album. So we wanted to kind of wrap it all up together and basically create a music product that could kind of reflect and celebrate the legacy of the band in all of its different stages and all of its different forms. So that was really that was my thinking as to why there should be this collection. I mean, we could have just had a selection of songs and just have it as one kind of greatest hits idea type CD, but nah, this is more, it's the legacy of the band. As I said, the different stages of the band, you can hear that it's interesting to listen to it. And plus now there's this fourth CD, which, as I said, shares another side that wasn't heard or known through the first three albums. So that's what I'm hoping people will just take away from it, is that they're going to have hopefully a more diverse Tadpole experience. If they weren't aware of certain songs before, I'm hoping that this gives them the chance to hear them, and yeah, just look back at what 12 years did with this band being active, So to be honest, I mean, even this release, it had its share of moments where there are a lot of things that had to happen before we could get to this point, right? So, for example, it was covered recently that we were able to get the music rights back to our first two albums. So, thankful to the record label for, allowing us to do this, for us to be able to negotiate this. Actually, I'll tell you the story. So, a little while back, a guy named Carl, who is... he works as the music buyer for JB Hi-Fi.
Okay.
Years ago, he actually worked for the record label, for EMI, right? But that's kind of by the by. He's such a big fan of New Zealand music, and he reached out to Dino at one point and was like, "Hey, vinyl's becoming a thing now. Is there any chance that we can get the Buddhafinger on vinyl?" Right? So this was this idea that planted the seed. Now, this was a little while ago, but at the time, we didn't own the rights as artists to be able to enable that. It was still within the ownership of the record label. So if you know anything about record label contracts, most of them are structured that they're owned by the record label for a long time. Anyway, so the seed was planted by this idea. And we then were like, I wonder if, what if? So it just planted the seed, but then nothing happened until earlier this year, where we were like, okay, let's see if we can open up this possibility. Anyway, long story short, I can't go into the details, but we reached an amicable agreement with our old record label. We secured the rights, and this was one of the first things that we wanted to do, because there'd been this gap with very little kind of anything to do with Tadpole music for, since the band broke up in 2006. So that was the thinking. Okay, well, now we can do this. Now we can package this up. Let's also go through the archives, find these hidden gems, create a fourth CD for this, put this together, put that out there. Those that remember the band, I hope it's going to be a great experience for them. They can get to hear the full journey of the band through the different years, and hear some interesting hidden gems that weren't released before. So that was part of the rationale for this. Like I said, we had these circumstances that worked out. We wanted to do something that celebrated the legacy of the band. And also now in February, we're looking to have a vinyl release for the Buddhafinger. So,
oh, nice one. Cool.
Yeah.
Who saw the vinyl sort of revival coming up? Did you have any idea that was going to happen?
No, not to this kind of extent. I mean, personally, when I've seen music trends, it's generally been like a certain trend comes round in like about a 20-year increment.
Yeah, 20 years.
About 20 years. That's what I've seen anyway. Vinyl certainly didn't stick to that logic, but
I think it came out of people not having a product anymore. I really liked owning a CD, especially ones you could open up, and there was the liner notes and the little photographs of the band and the lyrics and the thank yous, and having that actual material. You could play it in the car, you could bring it to parties, and it was this physical thing. And it could get signed by the artist as well. If you ever brought that unit in, and the people who made that thing could sign it. And then with MP3s and everything that happened with in the 2000s with streaming services and everything else, suddenly there was no product anymore. There was no object. So I feel like that's how vinyl kind of became a revival.
I'd say that you're on the right track. I mean, look, I'm still catching up with this vinyl thing now. I mean, I got myself like a Bluetooth vinyl record player just this year, right? So I'm a bit slow to that, but I think you're right. I think what it is when you listen to vinyl, it's a very intentional music listening experience, right?
Yeah.
You're not on the go. It's not a convenience thing. It's not like you're running and you're just listening to something to try and pass the time. You literally have to pull it out of its sleeve. You've got to sit down and you are intentionally immersing yourself in the album that you are going to listen to, right? So it's a vinyl listener, I think. Well, I mean, I can't speak from experience just yet, but I think they're a very different type of music listener. They're wanting to dive deeper into the album. They're wanting to intentionally listen to it and just have that experience. They're not multitasking. It's very intentional.
And very realistic as well, like taking the sleeve out, bringing the arm down, cleaning the needle. Very much like a almost religious practice,
Yeah, there's just all those. But yeah, you're right. It's just these little rituals. It's a very, very methodical thing. So when I left Tadpole, I had a bit of an identity crisis, right? So you've got to imagine, right? I've just spent the last 4 years as my identity as this person, right? I was the guitarist for Tadpole. That's what people have known me for the last 4 years. I'm now no longer that person. I was just a little bit kind of lost, right? And so I was going along to music gigs again, and when you see friends of yours getting up and gigging, after a while, like after I got over my sorry self, I was like, okay, I want to get back and do something musically again. You get that itch, right? You want to get out and do something. Now, Redline came about because my brother plays drums, and so he had just recently come back into the country from doing an OE over in the UK. And so I played guitar, he played drums, and that was kind of like the genesis and the starting point. I was like, I wanted to do something musically again. But now this was going to be something that was more, I guess, my musical vision, right? Because with Tadpole, it was always this entity, and I contributed where I can into it. Whereas this was now, okay, by this stage, I'd kind of developed as a musician. Now I wasn't just writing guitarists anymore and hoping that they fit into like a drum pattern and everything else. Now I was starting to think more holistically about songs. And that included, melodies and singing and that aspect of it. So Redline was something where now I was going into new territory as a musician. Now it was like vocals as well and not just writing guitar parts. My brother was there as the drummer, and then we basically formed a band and started jamming and had a bunch of great experiences as well. Certainly nowhere near as prolific as what Tadpole was, but the band was like this brotherhood. and we did all of played a bunch of shows. Some of the shows that I think were most high profile to certain music listeners was when we got to support Disturbed, and we got to support them on 2 tours. The first one we got to support them, Auckland and Christchurch, and then several years later they came back, and because they'd had such a great experience that first time, they actually asked if we were available to like play with them again on that. And so this was a bigger tour. This was their Music as a Weapon tour around 2008, 2009, where it was them, Alter Bridge, and POD, and us as the local openers. So we did that. We released an EP independently. And so, it's a different thing. It's still heavy rock music. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I know like my lane when it comes to being a musician and the songs that I write, I know I'm that heavy rock guy. There's just a certain type of style I guess I gravitate towards, but it's certainly not Tadpole. It's different again. But that was that. And so, did that for a number of years. That eventually went on hiatus because for personal reasons, my brother made the hard decision that he was going to move back to the UK because his partner was English and she wanted to go back. And so it was at that point that, long story short, the band went on hiatus after that. So I kind of I found myself kind of bandless for a little while after that. But there was always a music project that I could eventually get myself into.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, Chris, that's been really awesome talking to you. That's been a really long interview, but we covered lots of ground, heaps of history. That's awesome, man. Congratulations on the release, getting it all together.
Thank you very much. I mean, look, it's one of those things that I hope anyone that still remembers the band, I hope that it's a treat for them. Like, you know, that they get to hear something new that they haven't heard before, that it shows that the band was quite diverse in its songwriting in the different eras. It's an anthology. It's meant to celebrate like what the band was in all of its different stages. You know, before I joined the band, the lineup after I left the band. Look, it's still Tadpole. It's still really good rock music. And the interesting thing is that I think even now, like, even though it's like 15 years later, I think some of the music still stands the test of time. That's what I hope, that just people enjoy it. You know, it's something new. I hope they get something out of it. Nick, it's been good chat. It was fun. Like, we definitely covered a lot of ground. So
totally, man. Okay, cool, man. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, take care.